trust yourself? Do you trust yourself? That's the question that I want you to start thinking about, playing around within your mind as we get into this conversation. Something that I don't think that we consciously recognize enough when we're experiencing anxiety or when we're having discussions about anxiety is that it's literally fear. How many times when you're experiencing anxiety do you sit with yourself and think, I am afraid? I literally have been afraid since March of 2019. When I left college to do this, I have been afraid, petrified, scared shitless, as an old coach of mine once said. And I didn't know that I was afraid. I literally received the message, universe, God, spirit guides translating through this coach. The coach is like, you're scared shitless. And that's okay. I'm sitting here listening to this coach. I'm like, bitch, I'm not scared. And that's what any Scorpio woman would say. And then the narrator says, but she was in fact scared shitless. I was terrified. And I didn't recognize that I was terrified until I understood that anxiety is fear. What do I mean by this? So I can sit and I can have conversations. I would sit and I would have conversations with God. And I'm like, I'm so like worried about this. I want this. It wasn't like, because I wasn't sitting going, God, I am so scared about this worst case scenario. It was like, God, I don't want this worst case scenario. I don't want this worst case scenario. What are we going to do? I don't want this worst case scenario. I need you to move something around for me because I don't want this worst case scenario. I was pushing against a worst case scenario and I wasn't recognizing that I was afraid of the worst case scenario because I wasn't going, I'm so terrified because this is going to happen. I'm so terrified that this is a possibility. I was more so focused on, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I started to realize that I was afraid because it was just like, how can I explain this? I was just recognizing in my conversations that I was having with God where it's like, okay, you have one problem, one thing happens in your life, you've got one obstacle that you've got to overcome, and then you're terrified and you're terrified and you're terrified and you're terrified, but then you overcome that thing, right? You see some sort of resolution, the bill gets paid, something happens, and you're like, oh, crisis averted. And then all of a sudden, like magic, there's another crisis, there's another something. And I just started, asking that question of like, okay, like I'm done being in this cycle. I'm done being in the cycle of it being one thing after another. I'm done living in the cycle where it's like, it seems like there's always a potential bad thing that's coming. I'm not understanding. So I'm opening myself up to a higher perspective, trying to see things. Started to realize, okay, when I'm experiencing anxiety, I'm afraid. Okay. I was realizing it before I was realizing it, but when you put a name to an emotion, it does something. So, sidebar, for people that experience anxiety, for people that are living in a perpetual state of fear, and there is this worry, we're people, you're people, they are people, it doesn't matter, who believe that emotions are bigger than them. Believe that emotions are so strong, emotions are so powerful, emotions are so controlling. Emotions take over my entire body. I don't know what to do with them. I don't know how to handle this. I literally just don't know. So we've got this big, huge, overpowering thing your emotions is very much a full body experience. Your emotions are communication. Your emotions are communicating to you. That's the purpose of your emotions. Your emotions are communicating to you about your environment. But what happens is we didn't grow up in households with parents who knew anything about emotions, to be honest. We grew up in households with parents who were emotionally immature, meaning we grew up in households with parents who couldn't handle emotion, couldn't move through emotions, don't know what to do with emotion. And so a lot of people, what happens when you got this thing and you don't know what to do with it, you shame it, you push it away, you say that you don't want it, you do a whole bunch of things that just make the situation worse, because when you're pushing away from something, what are you doing? You're resisting, and whatever you resist persists. If you wanted to think of it from like a law of attraction standpoint, whatever you focus on is going to multiply. So what is my point? And I'm not saying this to like do any like fear mongering, change your thoughts. Otherwise, it's like, no, this is supposed to be relief. So if that doesn't give you relief, then let it go. In one ear, out the other. My point is that you've got your relationship with your emotions, your relationship with your fear, your relationship with your anxiety, your relationship with your stress is like if there was a big monster in your closet. You go to sleep at night and you are 999.9% sure that there is a monster in your closet and it's watching you and it's waiting for you to go to sleep so that it can steal your soul. I don't know what the monsters in your closet do, okay? There's a monster in your closet. There's a monster under your bed, and you are terrified. You don't have the capacity to face whatever this fucking monster is. So you just sit there, afraid. You lie awake at night. You're fucking terrified. You try to go to sleep. You manage to fall asleep. You don't get a deep, restful sleep because you're not completely allowing yourself to relax because you're so afraid and you have to be on high alert. Your nervous system is activated. Learning how to navigate through your emotions, learning how to manage your emotions is like when you have a monster in your closet, a monster under your bed, and you call your parents in the middle of the night and your parents say, there's a monster in your closet, and your parents turn on the lights and your parents open the closet and your parents show you that it is just a sweater. Your parents show you that it is just a pile of clothes. If your parents were a parent like me, then they would pray with you. They would call on the angels. They would have a conversation with you to help you recognize that you are safe and secure. And that number one, there is no monster. It's just a pile of clothes. And number two, if there was a monster, then that monster would not have the capacity to hurt you or harm you. Why? Because you live in a home, you live in an environment where you are loved, and to be loved means that you are protected, so you are safe. It's like if you had a really cool parent. Your parent's like, no, it wouldn't make sense logically for there to be a monster in your closet. Because it would be impossible. It would be impossible for some monster to hurt you or harm you because I'm here, because I exist. They'd have to be the dumbest monster around. The dumbest monster in all of existence. They'd have to be an idiot. They'd be going out of business. Your monster's going to be bankrupt. Okay, what's my point? Focus. My point is that when you have parents who recognize your fear, and those were just examples, I'm not necessarily saying, we're not going to get too deep, okay? Recognize it was an example, a little bit of metaphor, but you're following me on the story. When you have parents who know how to help you deal with your emotions, when you have parents that know how to help you regulate your nervous system, come back down to that state of calm, then being in that state of calm, feeling safe in your body, feeling safe in your environment, that becomes your dominant vibration, your dominant experience, and you just live a life where you're safe and secure. Except, my lovely people that are tuning into this, that was not your experience. By the way, if you are enjoying this chat, be sure to like the video and subscribe, and also come join me in my SAS membership, because these are the type of conversations, the type of audios that are inside of that, okay? So you grew up in environments where you did not have somebody who could help you return your nervous system to calm. So your nervous system was just shot. You were just afraid. You were just panicking. You have all of these emotions. You definitely were people who, I never thought about this connection before, but it makes a lot of sense. Most likely you experienced parentification, which is when you as a child are given too much responsibility, expected to behave like an adult or have the capacities to take care of yourself and others as an adult would, when that's not appropriate for your for the stage of development that you're at, we'll say. And parentification happens through so many things. For some of you, it's going to be because you were responsible for watching younger siblings from a really young age. And, you know, we think of it as not being a big deal, but when you have to watch a younger sibling, you are responsible for that person's well-being. You're responsible for their safety and security, making sure that they are being taken care of. Raising children is no joke. Some of you experience parentification by being in environments with your parents that are unsafe. You heard your parents complaining about bills. You heard them complaining about money. You heard them being afraid. Or even if you didn't hear these conversations, you felt it. For me, it's not that I oftentimes heard my mom complaining about bills or complaining about money, although she did talk about like her relationship with my dad, which was a source of stress and burden and parentification for me, and also like her relationships with like other people and stuff like that. But also I could feel it. I remember one time in my childhood, we were driving in a car and she was like listening to gospel music, and she was kind of like crying, and I was crying, and I didn't recognize it now, but just me being a Pisces mutable sign, you know, you are incredibly sensitive to your environment. So you're going to pick up on the feelings and the thoughts and different things like that of the people that you are surrounded by. So I didn't recognize it back then, of course, but I was picking up on the fears that my mom was experiencing, and the unsafety that she was experiencing. And also, this is another thing that we don't really talk about very often, but you know, if I had a conversation with my mom right now, she would say, I'm not afraid. I was never afraid. But she is somebody that experiences fear. So when our parents have emotions that they have suppressed, repressed, ignored, and have pushed away so much that they become unconscious to them, it can still be obvious to us. So you could have had parents that really try to put on a front, pretend like everything is good, but subconsciously, energetically, you know that something is off. You know that something isn't right. And so when you're raised in households and environments where emotions aren't dealt with, these things are not handled, we do not have a normal pattern or expectation of co-regulation. Hello, that is where your anxiety is stemming from, because you're terrified. There's something out there in the world that my parents can't even handle. Then you start thinking about yourself. I've got an audio up in the SAS membership that goes even deeper into this. So you are kind of automatically, yes, we're having a conversation about intergenerational trauma because of what you experienced, because of what you saw, because of what you felt. You're learning, I don't have the capacity to be a successful adult. I don't have the capacity to create an environment of safety and security for myself. Why? Because it's not something that you were taught. And your parents couldn't teach you something that they didn't know how to do. And it is what it is. And so your anxiety and your fear is just a natural consequence of your upbringing. I developed my relationship with God. I developed my relationship with the universe. I have so much trust. I have so much faith. And I'm still feeling afraid and worried about this thing. And I literally was sat in meditation. And it literally came to me like, do you trust yourself? You need to trust yourself. And I was like, oh my God. I don't trust myself. That's what it is. My worry is I don't trust myself. If I'm worrying about bills, if I'm worrying about my capacity to easily take responsibility for my life, to easily run a successful business, to easily allow myself to receive more than enough money, income, safety and security. I'm not confident in these things, and these are things that I need in order to be living the life that I want to live. I don't know how to do these things, and that's scary. When I started this business, I didn't think of it as a big deal. Just kind of like, all right, yeah, we're going. I have been terrified that I would make a mistake running my business. But instead of learning how to run my business successfully, I stayed in fear for a really long time. Because it literally is like that monster in the closet. And when we're having a conversation about courage, we're having a conversation here about having the courage to open up to resources and support and help. A lot of us live under the impression that you're supposed to be born with certain skills. And sometimes if we're having a conversation about things that have been passed down through generations, if you have a parent who has a default expectation of safety and security, then of course you're going to be born with a default expectation of safety and security, and that's going to be perpetuated. That momentum is going to build in your childhood experience. So yeah, you're going to be kind of sort of technically, yes, born with that expectation. But just because you're not born with that expectation doesn't mean that that's not possible for you. Doesn't mean that you can't reach that place. So the answer to your anxiety and the answer to your fear is developing new skills. In the Sagittarius full moon workshop on my Patreon, we go much more in depth into this, and that digital journal will powerfully help you in shifting this. I strongly suggest you go check that out if this is resonating with you. So what is my point? My point is that you want to get to a place where I trust myself. I trust myself to figure it out. I trust myself to find a way. I trust myself to find employment. I trust myself to find paying customers. I trust myself to find new work. I trust myself to find better partners. I trust myself to find better friends. I trust myself to find a way. I trust myself to figure it out. I believe in myself. I recognize that I am a capable, competent adult. I am a capable, competent adult that has the capacity to figure out how to successfully navigate through life. And that means I will learn whatever I need to learn. I can learn how to allow in more money. I can learn how to allow in more safety. I can learn how to allow in more security. I can learn how to allow in overflow. I can learn how to allow in abundance. I can learn how to allow in love. I can learn how to allow in anything that I need to learn how to allow in. I trust myself. A lot of you don't trust yourself because you didn't trust your parents. Why? Because your parents are fucking liars. Whether it's intentional or unintentional. Because they lied about their emotional state. They lied about things being okay. Or they lied about their capacity to be parents when they had you. You got to recognize that there is a betrayal inherent in your upbringing. When you were born into the world, you were born into parents. As a child, you assume your parents are going to take care of you. You assume they're going to make you feel safe. You assume that everything's going to be good. If that wasn't the case, there is an unspoken promise that has been broken. That is a betrayal that needs to be processed, that needs to be moved through, that needs to be healed. On an interpersonal level for your relationships with other people, but on an intrapersonal level as well, meaning your relationship with yourself. The relationship that we have with our parents, the way that our parents treat us, becomes a relationship that we have with ourselves, the way that we treat ourselves. If I can't trust my parents, how can I trust myself if my parents don't trust me? If my parents didn't set up an environment that was conducive to my growth, if my parents didn't have the capacity to foster my confidence in healthy ways that were appropriate for my developmental stages, if my parents didn't have the capacity to do that, then of course I don't trust myself. When you're dealing with that anxiety and you're dealing with that fear, really it's coming down to, my parents were not the best teachers. My teachers were not the best teachers. Nobody sat me down and helped me to understand how to move through the transitions in my life. It's like moving, I say it all the time, moving from middle school to high school, moving from high school to college, developing new skills, learning how to live in a new way in the world. Your emotional journey is the exact same. The journey to your desires is the exact same. We just live in a world where a lot of leaders, a lot of parents they don't have the emotional skills. So they can't teach you that. So you suffer. Okay? Will you trust yourself to figure it out? You trust yourself to handle whatever comes your way. You have a relationship with Spirit, the universe, God, your inner being. Will you recognize you can do it? All things through the universe, infinite intelligence that strengthens you. Then you put yourself in a position of empowerment. And it's okay to be afraid, but you have courage. Anxiety happens when we experience fear and we sit in our fear and we sit in that freeze response. You also want to start to do things to regulate your nervous system. You can look up those techniques. If you're part of the SAS membership, I've got a profile of my favorite videos online for regulating your nervous system. All right. So that's all that I've got for you. Thank you so much for listening in. If you like this, you want more of this, you can find early releases for other audios like this on my Patreon. I've got workshops that will support you in developing these skills and coming into an even greater awareness on Patreon as well. My SAS membership has audios, conversations like this, also EFT tapping, meditations that will support you even more on a somatic level, a physical level, in shifting, releasing, moving through emotions, bringing your body to a greater state of calm and ease. I've got a couple one-off offers on my site that will support you in this. A really good workshop, especially if you experience that enmeshment in your childhood. You're wanting to learn boundaries. You're wanting to learn to allow yourself to feel better, meaning feel safer and more secure, even though you've got emotionally immature parents. That would be really, really helpful to you. Starting to set those boundaries. And of course, if you'd like to work with me on a one-on-one capacity, then that's available to you as well. The links are in the description box. I love you guys so much. Thank you for liking, sharing, commenting. Please, I appreciate your positive feedback. And I'll talk to you in the next one. Bye.